The sun over Amman brought no warmth to the Sussexes in March 2026. Standing before the closed gates of the Jordanian palace, Harry and Meghan realized the Sussex halo had finally short-circuited. Their cosplay royal tour was met with a clinical diplomatic silence. No official greeting, no state motorcade, only the realization that they were now disaster tourists in a world that no longer recognized their script. Harry, his suit crumpled and his expression fixed in a 24/7 sulk, paced the hotel suite while staring at the radio silence from London. William's Iron Era had effectively lobbied every royal house in the Middle East to treat the Sussexes as commoners. The exclusion was total. While Meghan attempted to film Angelina-style content at refugee camps, the 4K lenses of the world only captured her forced smiles and the desperate eyes of a lead actress who had lost her director. But the Jordan disaster was merely a distraction. In the shadows of Toronto, a much older ghost had been summoned. Meghan's ex-husband, after a decade of silence, had finally handed over the original 1996 medical files to Crown Intelligence. The Phantom of 96, a secret daughter born before the world ever knew Meghan Markle's name, was no longer a rumor. It was a DNA-verified indictment. The sanitization protocols of the past had failed. The setting was a windowless interrogation room in Toronto, controlled by the Sovereign Succession Security Council. Meghan sat under the flicker of high-intensity lights, her mask finally slipping into a state of raw, unedited terror. On the metal table lay the 1996 birth records and a 4K image that mirrored her own face from 30 years ago. The door opened, and a young woman stepped in. She didn't need a script. Her features, the brow, the defiant set of the jaw, were a biological copy of Meghan in her early 20s. This was the secret child, the one Meghan and Marcus Anderson had spent years erasing from the records to protect the Sussex brand. Standing behind her was the ex-husband, holding the original lab results that proved the Crown's 2026 DNA audit was correct. Meghan's throat was dry. The buzzwords of racism and victimhood were useless against the cold reality of a living, breathing abandonment. The hidden cameras recorded her total psychological collapse as a Crown agent informed her that Netflix had already seen the files. The contract was void. The storyteller was revealed to be a fabricator of her own bloodline. In Windsor, William watched the feed in absolute silence. He didn't gloat. He simply closed the folder. Harry sat in the corner of the room, staring at the photo of the 1996 girl, realizing that his entire marriage was built on a foundation of erased history. "It's over, Meghan," the agent whispered into the room. "The ghost has a name, and she's taking back her life. You are no longer a duchess. You are a footnote. It didn't start with a headline. In the Iron Era, the truth doesn't ask for permission from the press. It began at 4:02 p.m. GMT on March 3, 2026, with a massive, uncensorable data dump on a decentralized global server. The file was simply titled The Toronto Ghost, 1996-2026. The world didn't just watch, it recoiled. The leak contained high-definition scans of the original 1996 Toronto medical records, birth certificates, and, most devastatingly, a 30-second video clip. In it, a young pre-fame Meghan Markle is seen in a grainy 1990s home movie, holding a newborn. The metadata was undeniable. The DNA markers were verified by 3 independent global labs. Within minutes, the Phantom of 96 had a name: Maya. She wasn't a rumor anymore. She was a living, breathing indictment of 30 years of calculated erasure. The reaction in California was a scorched earth event. The celebrities who had once championed Meghan as the ultimate victim performed a synchronized vanishing act. The scrubbing. Netflix officially moved the Sussex category to archived and issued a brief, cold statement regarding contractual fraud. The silent phone. The fashion houses that had flirted with her Vindication Tour wardrobe suddenly lost her measurements. In Hollywood, being a rebel is a brand. Being a deceiver of one's own blood is a terminal infection. The uncanceling of the British monarchy began in real time. The narrative flipped. The cruel royals were now seen as the silent protectors who had endured years of character assassination to keep a family secret they didn't create. The digital tide turned with the violence of a tsunami. The hashtag shifted from "That's Justice for Meghan" to "The Toronto Ghost" and "Where is Maya?" The 4K mask slips analyzed by the royal rogue were no longer seen as conspiracy theories. They were seen as the psychological symptoms of a woman who had spent half her life running from her own reflection. Meghan, currently in a secure debriefing facility, watched the global metrics of her own destruction. She saw her star meter rating vanish. She saw the groove of contempt on her face being memed by millions. The storyteller had finally been told. In the high-tech war room of the Sovereign Succession Security Council, Prince William watched the world burn. He hadn't leaked the files himself. He didn't have to. He had simply lowered the shields around the ex-husband and let the truth do the work of 1,000 lawyers. "The public wants a statement," an aide whispered. "No," William replied, his face a mask of clinical iron. "The truth doesn't need a spokesperson. It only needs an audience. Let the world sit in the silence of what they supported." The global detonation was complete. The Sussex brand was ash. But beneath the debris, a new, even colder reality was forming. The constitutional guillotine was being sharpened, and it was looking for more than just Meghan's reputation. On the morning of March 4th, 2026, the fog over the River Thames didn't lift. It seemed to solidify around the Palace of Westminster. Inside, the atmosphere was clinical. There were no shouts, no debates, only the cold efficiency of a government performing a necessary surgical strike on the body of the state. The Prime Minister stood before a hushed House of Commons to introduce the Titles Deprivation and Succession Exclusion Act of 2026. The core of the act rested on the 1996 Toronto infraction. Under the new Iron Era legal framework, the marriage between Henry Charles Albert David and Rachel Meghan Markle was declared founded upon fundamental misrepresentation of lineage and history, the erasure of the Sussex name. By 12 p.m., the Duke and Duchess of Sussex ceased to exist in the eyes of British law. The titles were returned to the crown, never to be issued again. The name reset. Meghan was legally reverted to Rachel Meghan Markle. Harry, stripped of his HRH status and his princely rank, was registered simply as Mr. Henry Mountbatten. The most brutal aspect of the guillotine was the total removal of the Sussex line from the order of succession. Parliament ruled that because the foundational narratives provided at the time of the marriage were fraudulent, any hereditary rights derived from that union were null and void. The children. In a move that sent shockwaves through the remaining Sussex squad, Archie and Lilibet were removed from the line of succession. They were no longer prince or princess. They were children of a private citizen, their royal status deleted as if it were a clerical error in a 4K ledger. Under the Exclusion Act, all remaining UK-based assets linked to the former Sussex brand were seized by the Crown Estate. The Royal Lodge Vault, the insurance ledger, found in Andrew's basement, was officially designated a state secret. Anyone possessing or discussing its contents was now subject to the Official Secrets Act. The financial freeze, the juicy checks from Netflix were intercepted by the Treasury under a fraudulent gains recovery order. The money meant for Harry's survival was redirected to a fund for victims of institutional deception. King Charles did not sign the act with a heavy heart. He signed it with the steady hand of a monarch who had seen his spare become a saboteur. Behind him stood William, the true architect of the guillotine. "It isn't a punishment," William whispered as the ink dried on the final document. "It's a sterilization. We are making sure that when the history of this decade is written, their names are only found in the footnotes of scandals, not in the registers of the throne." The constitutional guillotine had fallen. There was no blood, only the sound of paper being filed away. The Sussexes were no longer a threat. They were a memory that the state was now actively forgetting. The meeting didn't take place in a palace. It took place in a secluded, rain-lashed cottage on the far edge of the Windsor estate, a place the security teams called the Sanctuary. There were no cameras here, no 4K lenses, and no Netflix contracts. Henry Mountbatten sat in a wooden chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was no longer a duke. He was no longer a prince. He was simply a man waiting to meet the physical manifestation of a 30-year lie. The door opened, and Maya walked in. The silence that followed was absolute. Henry didn't see a stranger. He saw the ghost of the woman he had married. Maya, at 29, was the living image of the Meghan Markle from the 1990s Toronto home movies. The same defiant chin, the same deep, searching eyes, but without the practiced Duchess glaze. She didn't curtsy. She didn't offer a royal greeting. She simply sat opposite him and placed a small, faded photograph on the table. It was a picture of a baby in Toronto, 1996, held by a woman whose face had been surgically altered by fame and time. "I didn't come for the money, Henry," Maya said, her voice a hauntingly familiar cadence. "The Iron King has already seen to it that I'm taken care of. I came because I wanted to see the man who gave up a kingdom for a woman who told him I didn't exist." Henry looked at the photo, then at the girl. Every word salad, every privacy plea, and every 4K mask slip flashed through his mind in a sickening montage. He realized that while he was fighting the British press for truth, his own wife was the architect of the ultimate deception. "What?" "She told me I was a miracle," Henry whispered, his voice breaking. "She told me we were creating a new world." "She was creating a script," Maya replied, "and you were just the leading man she needed to get to the final act." The 10 minutes were nearly up. Outside, the black SUV of the Sovereign Succession Security Council was idling, ready to take Henry back to his digital blackout. In that moment, the bond didn't just fray, it shattered. Henry realized that his marriage wasn't a love story for the ages. It was a long con for the ages. He had abandoned a dying grandmother, a sick father, and a brother who had tried to warn him, all to protect a woman who had abandoned her own flesh and blood before the world ever knew her name. As Maya stood to leave, she didn't look back. She walked out into the rain, a free woman for the first time in 30 years. Henry picked up his phone, the unbranded secure device provided by William's team. He had one outbound call allowed. He dialed the debriefing facility in the Highlands, where Meghan Markle was being held. She answered on the first ring, her voice already shifting into the victim tone she had mastered. Is that you? Have you talked to the lawyers? We can still fix this." "It's over, Rachel," Henry said, the name sounding strange and heavy on his tongue. "I've met her. I've seen the records. Don't call me again. There is no script left to write." He ended the call and dropped the phone into the fireplace. As the device melted in the embers, the last link to the Sussex era died. Henry Mountbatten stood up, walked to the window, and looked toward Windsor Castle. The Iron Era was cold and it was lonely, but for the first time in a decade, it was real. The facility was known only as Sector 7, a gray, nameless stone estate nestled in the jagged shadows of the Cairngorms. There was no Wi-Fi here, no cellular towers. The only connection to the outside world was a single, encrypted landline used by the Sovereign Succession Security Council. Meghan Markle sat in a room that smelled of old wool and damp peat. She was still wearing the navy wool coat from her vindication tour, but the buttons were loose and the fabric was stained with the salt of the Highland mist. Every morning at 9:00 a.m., Rachel stood before the high-definition security camera mounted in the corner of her ceiling. She didn't look like a prisoner. She looked like a woman preparing for a segment. She would speak for hours, her voice projecting with the practiced cadence of a podcast host. She pitched new narrative arcs to the lens, stories of redemption, of a queen of the Highlands who would one day return to save a broken Britain. She performed 4K mask slips for an audience of precisely 0 fracticides. "She's still writing scripts," the security logs recorded. "She treats the guards like production assistants and the interrogation room like a green room. She hasn't realized yet that the show was canceled 3 weeks ago." Back in the real world, the erasure was absolute. The digital scrub. On the official royal website, the Sussex landing page now redirected to a 404 error. The Hollywood amnesia. In Montecito, the Olive Grove estate had been quietly listed for sale by a shell company linked to the crown. Her name had been removed from the credits of every upcoming Netflix project under a morality and fraud clause. The world didn't hate her anymore. It had simply forgotten her. The vindication had been replaced by a crushing, universal indifference. On the 14th day of her debriefing, a single letter arrived. It wasn't from Harry. It was a clinical, typewritten note on stationery embossed with the cipher of Queen Catherine. It contained no words of anger. It simply contained a list of the 2026 UK school rankings where Archie and Lilibet, now registered under the surname Mountbatten, were enrolled as private citizens. They are safe, the letter concluded. They are being taught the value of silence. You should do the same. As the sun set over the jagged peaks of the Highlands, Meghan Markle walked to the window. She saw the black SUVs of the Sovereign Succession Security Council patrolling the perimeter. She saw the gray mist swallowing the world. She picked up a pen and began to write on the back of a discarded soup menu. The Return of the Duchess. She looked at the security camera and smiled, a perfect 4K Hollywood smile. But in the Highland silence, the only thing that smiled back was the red power light of the camera, recording a story that would never be broadcast.